Hey there, and welcome to the ITONICS Academy. I'm Rousseau, and I'll be taking you through the essentials of scenario planning. The course is designed for innovation leads, strategy teams, and R&D professionals. Organizations often plan for one version of the future, but the future rarely cooperates. So we're going to examine the essentials of scenario planning, what it is, why it matters, and the steps to do it. By the end, you'll know how to build scenarios that will make your strategy more resilient and more credible to decision makers. So, let's get started. Every organization has a plan, and most have just one. That plan is built on assumptions about how markets will behave, how technology will evolve, and how competitors will move. When those assumptions hold, the plan works. When they don't, the organization is exposed. Markets shift, regulations change, technologies disrupt industries overnight. A single plan creates blind spots and fragility. That's exactly why scenario planning exists, to prepare for multiple plausible futures rather than betting everything on one. Let's start with a precise definition. A scenario is a plausible narrative of how certain forces could combine to create a specific future state. It's not a prediction, it's not a wish list. It's a structured story that helps your organization think clearly about risk and opportunity. Some people confuse scenario planning with forecasting. Forecasting uses historical data and statistical models to predict what is most likely to happen. It is a useful method, but it depends on the future resembling the past. Scenario planning asks a different question, not what will happen, but what futures could plausibly happen. It is designed for situations where past patterns may not hold, and where the range of possible futures matters as much as the most probable one. So, what actually makes up a scenario? Scenarios aren't built from gut feel. They're constructed from four specific components. Drivers of change, the environmental forces shaping your industry, from technology shifts to regulatory moves. Basic trends, predictable directions we expect to continue. Key uncertainties, unpredictable factors that could break either way. And lastly, rules of interaction, how trends and uncertainties influence each other to produce different outcomes. Scenarios are built from combinations of these four elements. That keeps the process credible and reproducible. When you present scenarios to leadership, you need to show the logic behind each one. But scenario planning is most valuable in specific conditions. It earns its place when uncertainty is high and the cost of being wrong is significant. Use it when your industry faces disruption or major regulatory change. When business as usual thinking is dominating your strategy, or when you need a common language to build consensus across a diverse leadership group. A useful trigger question: if two of your most plausible futures would require fundamentally different strategies for your organization, you're in scenario planning territory. Now, let's lay out the steps of the process. Step 1 is the situation analysis. The goal is to identify which external forces actually matter for your organization's future. Start with the STEEP framework: society, technology, economy, environment, and politics. Work through each category and list the forces influencing your industry today and over the next decade. Then, assess each driver on two dimensions: the degree of impact it could have and the velocity of change. From that, you narrow down to the 5 to 10 drivers that genuinely matter. Consider the following example. A medical device manufacturer's situation analysis surfaced 3 dominant drivers: accelerating digital health regulation in the EU, the rising velocity of AI in diagnostics, and shifting patient-centered care expectations. Without the steep exercise and impact velocity assessment, the team had no basis to prioritize. With it, they had a defensible shortlist to build from. Step 2 involves projections. With your key drivers identified, project the range of plausible trajectories each could take over a 5 to 10 year horizon. Think in spectrums instead of single lines. AI adoption could plateau due to costs, distrust, and regulation, or accelerate toward industrial transformation. Regulation could tighten under public pressure or relax as nations compete for leadership in the AI race. For each driver, define the two ends of its spectrum. These spectrums become the axes from which your scenarios are built. As a third step, take two key drivers and plot them on a two-axis matrix. Each axis represents one driver and its spectrum of outcomes. The four quadrants that emerge represent four distinct future worlds. A good pairing requires two things. Both drivers must carry genuine uncertainty, and they should be largely independent of each other. In the end, you want combinations where different outcomes create genuinely different strategic challenges. Step 4 involves implications. Not all scenarios that emerge are equally useful, so test each for internal consistency across 3 dimensions. First, are the trend trajectories compatible with your time frame? Second, do the combined drivers produce logical outcomes without contradictions? Third, are there major stakeholders, such as governments or global institutions, who could actively prevent this future? Scenarios that pass these tests move forward. Your team selects the most strategically relevant ones based on desirability, strategic alignment, and impact magnitude. These selected scenarios become the lens through which you discover opportunity spaces and shape strategy. Once you've selected your scenarios, you can unlock their real value to make more deliberate portfolio decisions. Build 3 distinct portfolio compositions. First, your core portfolio, optimized for near-term conditions. Then, your adaptive portfolio, building capabilities that stay relevant across multiple scenarios. And lastly, your optionality portfolio, small, deliberate bets on high-impact futures that may be unlikely today but would be critical if they materialize. The right mix depends on your industry's volatility and risk tolerance. A stable sector company might allocate 70% to core, 20% adaptive, and 10% to optionality. A disruption-facing company might shift that balance significantly. Most organizations do not consciously choose a composition. They inherit one as projects accumulate and priorities drift. But scenario planning forces the conversation about whether that drift is intentional. From there, every portfolio must balance 5 dimensions. Do not prioritize using only one criterion. Ranking projects by ROI alone, for example, produces portfolios that look clean on paper but fail under real conditions. Every robust portfolio must balance all 5 dimensions simultaneously: strategic alignment, risk profile, time horizon, resource requirements, and innovation type. When you evaluate projects against all 5 together, you'll likely find your portfolio is strategically aligned but dangerously short-term, or well-balanced in risk but resource overloaded. These trade-offs are only visible when all 5 dimensions are in view at once. Let's look at 2 organizations that used scenario-based thinking to make consequential portfolio decisions. The most documented example comes from Shell. In the late 1960s, Shell's planning team began developing long-term scenarios that questioned the industry's prevailing assumption of endless growth. Their scenarios highlighted a possibility that most oil companies' executives found uncomfortable: that Gulf states could shift the oil market from a buyer's to a seller's market, giving producing countries control over price and supply. When the 1973 OPEC embargo hit and oil prices quadrupled, Shell had already acted on that scenario. The refining coordinator had used the scenarios to advocate for an upgrading strategy, converting heavy fuels into lighter ones that had no easy substitutes. While competitors were caught off guard, Shell was positioned to respond. It's an oft-cited example of scenario planning translating directly into portfolio decisions. The second example is UPS. By the mid-1990s, UPS was the world's largest package delivery company, but its planning process was built for a stable, domestic environment. E-commerce was emerging, globalization was accelerating, and new competitors were entering logistics from unexpected directions. A single long-range plan couldn't capture what the leadership team needed to prepare for. In 1997, UPS hired consultants to run its first formal scenario planning exercise. The team built 4 scenarios using a 2-axis matrix. One of them, called Brave New World, described a deregulated, globalized marketplace where customers would need more services. That scenario raised a question. What if customers would soon need retail access points, not just package pickup? The existing strategy had no answer. That informed the decision to acquire mailboxes, etc. in 2001, adding over 3,500 retail locations across the United States to complement the company's hub network. In 2005, UPS CEO Michael Askew commissioned a second scenario planning round, recognizing that scenario planning remained essential to prepare the company for an uncertain future. Okay, let's recap. Single plan strategies create fragility. When the assumptions behind your plan don't hold, the organization is exposed. Scenario planning is the discipline that prepares you for multiple plausible futures instead of betting everything on one. Scenarios are built from 4 components: drivers of change, basic trends, key uncertainties, and rules of interaction. The process for scenario planning moves through 4 steps: situation analysis, projections, scenario construction, and implication testing. From there, you translate scenarios into 3 portfolio compositions: core, adaptive, and optionality, and test your portfolio against 5 dimensions simultaneously. Shell and UPS use this approach to make consequential decisions with greater confidence. The method won't let you predict the future, but it can prepare your organization for multiple futures. That brings us to the end of this course. I hope it's provided a useful introduction to scenario planning. There are many more courses in the ITONICS Academy to explore. And if you'd like to see scenario planning in practice on the ITONICS platform, just book a demo with our experts. See you next time.